Unass. A Situation Normal series. By Chris Lowry. Chapter 1. If you fucking throw up on me, I'll blow your head off as soon as we get down, the buzzcut next to me screamed. He had to yell. The flying cargo transport had no walls and nothing more than a thin piece of metal for a floor. It raced along the coast just off the beach at 180 miles an hour. Cowboys don't puke, do they, cowboy? The man on the other side screamed back. He didn't punch me in the shoulder. He couldn't. But he looked like he would have. Name's Martin. I shouted. Nobody gives a fuck about your name, cowboy, the right-hand man screamed. He had black letters stenciled on the breastplate of his modified armor suit that said Trit. Yeah, cowboy, the other shouted. Ain't worth learning your name. You're about to be dead anyway. I was afraid he was right. We were clamped into the transport, hanging from the ceiling like meat on a hook in a butcher shop. I knew what was about to happen. The thin floor underneath us to reveal the sandy brown water of the ocean as it crashed into the shore below us. The transport would dive at a 45-degree controlled descent and pull up 20 feet off the ground. If the pilot was good, he would level off 10 to 15 feet off the hard-packed sand. The clamps attached to the thick body armor would release and drop the contents of the cargo area to the ground below. We would roll and come up fighting as the pilot angled for the stratosphere at 90 degrees. The hot insert was designed by a strategy expert in Washington, D.C., a rapid deployment tactic to deliver small groups of 24 light fighters into a battlefront with the least amount of exposure to enemy fire. When we took off 20 minutes ago, I counted 38 transports lined up on the tarmac with even more stacked up behind the hangar like cars locked in gridlock. Be ready. The squad leader slapped the chest of his armor with a closed gauntlet. The light above his head began flashing red. We hit that beach, cowboy, you come up shooting your rifle and leave that fucking camera in the pack, Trit yelled. I'm not supposed to be here, I muttered to myself. If I said it any louder, the rest would give me hell for it, and it wouldn't matter anyway. I was supposed to be covering a fashion shoot with swimsuit models somewhere tropical. It was the way the world should end, surrounded by scantily clad beautiful women and boat drinks. Not in the belly of a troop transport built by the lowest government bidder and not on a bloody beach south of Los Angeles. The light above the squad leader switched to green and my world upended. The transport raced toward the ground while my brain screamed against it. It should have felt like a roller coaster, that tummy tickle that stayed at just above your nuts and sent a shiver of electricity up your spine. But we took fire, and the pilot juked into a steeper angle than 45. It felt like freefall. The wind shrieked through the open walls as the floor cranked back to reveal blue sky instead of beach. Half the floor stopped halfway open. The squad leader tried to kick it with his booted foot, but couldn't reach. Trit lost his rifle as it slipped from his fingers. Lucky for him it was strapped to his armor to prevent just such a thing from happening. Unlucky for me, and the guy on the other side of him as the 48 inches of thick metal bounced on the end of the leash and slapped both of us with heavy meaty thuds. I yanked my head back to avoid a blow, and took it on the eyebrow instead. Hot liquid gushed across my face. Men screamed. The sky tilted again as the pilot yanked on the control and brought us even with the ground. Now. The squad leader tried to scream as his clamp released. It dropped him into the half-open floor. He pitched forward and slammed his head into the far side of the deck, canting his neck back until his helmeted skull flopped 3/4 of the way around. The rest of the men on the left side dropped after him, on top of him, folding through the opening like they were supposed to. They dropped and plopped on the sand, rolling in dirty surf that was turning red. My side dropped too. I hit the half-open door and slid out, legs first. We were 5 feet off the ground, so when my feet hit, the forward momentum and top-heavy armor bounced me forward. My face plowed into the ground and pitched into the wet sand, scraping the open wound on the eyebrow, shoving gunk and muck into my mouth. Water crashed on top of me and held me down. I was lucky the landing knocked the wind out of me, because there was no way to breath. A boot or something stood on my back and shoved me further down. Pain lanced down from my head as sand ground into the cut. Something jerked me out of the surf by the collar. The man on my left side shook me. Get up. He spit in my face. Get up and fight. A red bolt lanced across the sand and vaporized his head. Crimson mist coated my cheeks as his body flopped across my legs. Trit dropped next to me. Fucking shoot. He fired with one hand as his other hand shoved the dead man's rifle toward me. The grip was slippery with seawater. I shoved a finger through the trigger, aimed where he pointed and began firing 3-round bursts inland. I couldn't see what we were shooting at, but I could see that whatever it was firing back. Red blots seared the blue sky and flashing bolts like a lightning storm. I'd been in a firefight in Kabul once, hunkered down with the unit while it was under attack. The enemy used tracer rounds that left after images burned on my retinas, so bright sometimes it hurt to watch. This looked like that. Move. Trit hauled against the collar of my armor and dragged me to my feet. He kept up a steady stream of firing, so I followed his example. Bodies and pieces of bodies littered the beach. A one-armed fighter stood screaming as he shot back, the smoking stump of his torso black and red. One of the transports exploded behind us and sent us to the ground. Trit fired from the sand. I couldn't see what he was aiming at. Just a direction. I shot too. When he moved up, I followed, camera forgotten. Something choked against my neck, pulling with every step. I fired with one hand and felt with the other. The leash to my rifle was wrapped around my neck. I reeled it in, squeezed it between my knees and racked the safety, and began shooting with both hands. There was no way I was accurate. No way to be. I couldn't see what we were shooting at. Just positions. Just smoke, and noise, the crackle of flames, the flashes of laser fire from the enemy. Steady pounding of waves crashing into the shore, the distinct thud of our weapons returning fire. Smoke covered everything. I could only see from one eye. The other hurt, swollen and crusted with blood. Trit led us to the shore wall, a 4-foot-tall concrete barrier. He ducked behind it first and caught a glimpse of me shooting with 2 rifles. Then I fell beside him and he grinned a madman's grin. "Fucking cowboy!" he screamed. "Fuck yeah!" He checked the magazine to his rifle and refreshed it, then helped with mine as more fighters hit the wall with us. The beach was carnage, like some Hieronymus Bosch painting of hell. Trit shoved a rifle back in my hands. "Stow the other," he grunted. "Short controlled bursts. Let's push these fuckers back and give our guys some room to breath." Another transport took a direct hit from a laser. Bodies spilled from the sides, from the bottom, dropping men 15 feet into the surf before it did a cockpit first dive into the water and exploded. Debris and seaweed rained down on the sand. Trit fished 2 grenades out of pack on his armor belt. "Play baseball?" He passed one to me and pulled a pin on his own. "Fastball, motherfucker." He arced his over the retaining wall and held out his hands for the one in mine. The first one exploded, followed a few seconds later by the next. Dirt showered around us as he popped over the wall and fired into the smoke. "Go. Go." He rolled over the wall and advanced. I don't know why I followed. Safe was relative, but there was a concrete barrier between me and the things trying to shoot me. The soldiers that hopped over after Trit were trained for this shit. Trained to shoot, trained to kill. I was supposed to document it for network television. Hide behind a camera, aim through the lens and not the sight of a military rifle. I spit sand out of my mouth and watched more men pile toward the small zone where lasers weren't firing. Watched them run straight up the beach toward me, and flip over the wall. I joined them. I shot too. I pulled the trigger until the magazine ran dry and traded it for the second rifle Trit latched to my armor by the leash. I fired and kept on firing as we ran together. Chapter 2. "Some people are born to fight, cowboy," Trit said. He was all eyes and white teeth under a layer of grime on his face beneath his helmet. "You ain't one of them." I shrugged. "I wasn't supposed to be here," I told him. "Hell fucker, none of us wanted to be here." "You joined to fight," I reminded him. "Fuck that noise, I joined to pay for college." I raised one eyebrow. The other wouldn't move. There was a goose egg knot under it from where his rifle gave me a smack on our way in. The fighting had died down, and left us in the wake of a calm like the eye of a hurricane, and we were taking a small break. The whole Trit opened and the enemy fortifications released a small platoon-sized force behind their lines. I wouldn't call it devastation or even a victory. Over half the troops lay on the beach, and another fourth were injured waiting for pickup. But the enemy pulled back, and so far I hadn't seen one of them. Pieces, sure. Scaly reptilian arms and legs, green-black thick liquid that oozed out of the ends. They were good about hauling off their dead and wounded. And weapons. "Don't give me the squirrel eye, motherfucker. I got brains," Trit grinned. "He just don't know how to use 'em," one of our squad cut in. "Brains are what got us here," Trit said. Fucking headshed sat around a table and said, "Hey, you know it works? D-Day Part 2. D-Day?" Owen asked. "Fucking study some history, you moron." Trit wiped off his rifle and passed the sand-covered rag to Owen to do the same. "Doomsday," Owen nodded. "We sure got some of that shit." Trit shook his head but didn't bother to correct the other man. I liked him more for it. "If you want it to work, throw some goddamn bodies at it," he muttered. "Cannon fodder." He perked up at the sound of lasers blasting further down the beach. "Now we root out these nest motherfuckers and buy us some more real estate." He glanced over the edge of a car parked on the street. We were a block from the beach, a row of buildings between us and the horrors on the sand. "They won't send in a dust-off until we clear some safe space," he said over his shoulder. We could hear the wounded just on the other side of the retaining wall where they had been dragged by survivors. Medics crawled among them, but there wasn't much help to offer, other than vials of morphine and pain dampeners. The alien weapon seared the flesh and sealed it, so blood loss was minimized dependent on where the victim was hit. Like the man I saw standing on the beach during the firefight. He lost an arm, but not much blood. Just the shock and a third-degree burn where his stump was. He was with the survivors, I guessed. But I saw another man lose his head. No way to come back from that. "You take any pictures yet?" Owen nodded to the camera case strapped to my armor. I shook my head. He glanced in the direction of the beach. "Yeah," he whispered. "I don't blame you. Don't you listen to him, cowboy. Folks need to see that shit. We make it through this alive, you can take all the fucking selfies you want. Right now, I need you on the trigger." I tapped the magazine in my rifle. "You got more?" I shrugged. Truth was, I didn't know what was in the packs on the armor. I was shanghaied into the transport as soon as I landed, and no amount of protesting changed it. A colonel passed me to a captain, he turned me over to a squad leader who didn't have time for my shit or anything that came out of my mouth. He slapped me into body armor and clamped me in the belly of a transport without saying a word until it locked me into place. "This cowboy's ready to ride," he announced to Trit as the transport took off and he locked into place. "Brooks, Shelton, make a weapons check on those wounded on the other side of the wall," Trit motioned to two of the men behind me. They nodded, checked directions and crossed to the wall. I could see them acquiring munitions packs and weapons from the wounded. "Won't they need that to keep safe?" I asked. "That's what we're fucking here for," Trit smiled. "You go kill every fucking alien motherfucker you see and we'll all be safe, and you're gonna need a shit ton of ammo to do it. You savvy?" "I savvy," I told him. "Fuck yeah you do," his grin was contagious. "You been knee-deep before?" I nodded. "Sandbox. Mountains." It was his turn to nod. "I thought all that shit was past tense as soon as these fuckers showed up." "That's what they tell the news." "You're the news." "I know better." "Damn right, and you keep that straight. You got big fights all over, and little fights here and there. Only one fight matters right now. Survival of the human race?" "Fuck no," he said as Brooks and Shelton scurried back and began passing out ammunition. "Survival of this human." He tapped his chest through the armor. "You can survive too, if you want, but you get my six and you keep me safe, you got it." The other men laughed, small chuckles that didn't seem out of place. "I savvy," I said again. "Now he fucking gets it," said Trit. "And you want him to take fucking pictures." He made a quick circle with his hand and we followed him up the sidewalk in the direction of where we could hear more fighting. Chapter 3. It was a straight shot 400 meters up the sidewalk and across 2 block streets to the next nest. More soldiers should have poured in after us, deploying in both directions, but most of our backup was on the beach. I checked over my shoulder and couldn't see any more transports dragging more conscripts to help, so it was up to us. A dozen men lined up behind me at my third-in-line spot and I wondered for a moment how I got so close to the front. It couldn't be a good spot. Trit carried point, so he would be the first to see danger and drop. Owens was next in line, and he would do as Trit did. That left me, Johnny-come-lately to the safety meeting ready to absorb enemy fire as a dumbass target just standing there. Trit dropped. I beat Owens to the sidewalk. The rest of the men followed. Trit pointed to his eyes and held up 3 fingers. "I don't know what that means," I whispered. "Fucking puke," he muttered back at me. "It means 3 tangos," Owens offered. "What do you want me to do about it?" Trit growled. "Frag those fuckers." He popped up on one knee, sighted down his rifle and sent 4 3-round bursts into the nestling waist to the men trapped on the beach. Owens, Brooks and I popped up and added our bullets to the mix. It might have been overkill, but I wanted to see what we were fighting. They were big, half as tall again as Trit, like NBA players stretched in proportionate humanoid shape. Lizard snout faces with reptilian eyes and scaly skin. 3-fingered claws gripping the weapons that shot lasers. Round holes punched through the thick skin, green-black blood erupted in tiny geysers. One hissed unintelligible words into a communicator and tried to drag his 2 comrades away from our field of fire. It didn't work. We peppered him into hamburger meat. Trit popped up and hopped into the nest. It was nothing more than 2 cars angled together to create a V-shape that faced the beach, a larger laser rifle secured to the trunk of one of the cars. He tried to lift the weapon, but it was too heavy. Inbound. Brooks screamed and angled his rifle further up the street. A hover jet platform raced above the stalled cars, another heavy weapon anchored to the front. 3 aliens manned the top side and they began firing down toward us. Red bolts burned the asphalt into puddles of tar as they zeroed in on our position. Trit popped a grenade under the mounted gun and dragged me back as he ran to put distance between us and the explosion that followed. It sent up a roiling cloud of greasy smoke that blocked the flying hover jet's view. He rolled over and fired into the cloud, aiming for the noise. I did too. The others joined in. The alien vessel canted down and plowed into the 2 cars. It sent aliens flying, 1 in 2 parts. The 2 survivors limped up, laid down cover fire and dragged the bodies of their dead away, even as we tried to shoot them. Our foray into the fixed position cleared an opening for the men on the beach to move, and more poured over the wall to join us on the sidewalk. Trit tied them as they made their way to the safe spot between the cars locked on the street and the solid wall of buildings behind us. "Rank!" he screamed. "Get me a rank up here." The rescued men cowered in shock, recovering from their encounter on the shore. No one answered his call. "Owens!" Trit shouted and searched for the man. His back rested against the edge of a car, feet splayed. One was on the sidewalk, the other in the narrow gutter under the passenger door. He had a hole the size of my fist in his armor. The edges of it still sizzled, sending up small tendrils of smoke. I hated that it smelled like barbecue. "God damn it," Trit yelled. "Any of you fuckers got a comm unit?" One of the men behind me raised his hand. "Speak up, motherfucker." The kid looked 12. I know he was older, maybe on the south side of 18, but I thought he should still be in diapers. "Our radio is on the beach, sir." "Sir?" Trit screamed again. "I work for a fucking living." He ducked over the edge of the car and searched the sand. "Somebody get out there and get me that radio," he shouted. "I've got a feeling it's about to get bad out here." I followed his look to where the aliens had disappeared further down the road. We could hear the noise of a giant engine humming to life, or something that sounded like it. I watched Brooks and another soldier scramble to the beach to retrieve the radio and shuddered. "I don't know how much more bad we can take," I said. "Me neither," Trit answered. I didn't think he heard me. Chapter 4. Brooks crawled back from the beach, a square-shaped comm unit strapped to his back. There was no sign of the other man who went with him. He wiggled up next to Trit. "Work it!" Trit screamed. "Don't know how." Brooks yelled back. I bent over him and tried to study the configuration on the pack, but nothing was marked. I flipped a switch and got static, flipped it back and got a beep. "You know how to do that?" Another soldier settled next to me. He had Mo stenciled on the chest of his armor, and a burn mark on his cheek. I shook my head. He shoved my hands away and fished a wireless microphone from a hidden compartment flush with the side of the unit. "It's supposed to route the throat mics," he explained. "Only the fuckers didn't give us any throat mics." He flipped the same switch I did, except his fingers shifted right to push a touchscreen dial to 0 in the frequency. "You Comtech?" Trit asked. "Mechanic," Mo answered. "They put these radios in the BWTs." "Work it on the go," Trit ordered. "We've got to keep moving." "What's a BWT?" I crouched up to shuffle after Trit, helping Brooks scramble to keep up with Trit as he led the 15 of us up the road between the sidewalk and cars. "Big-wheeled transport," Mo said. "Original, right?" I would have shrugged if it mattered. The simplicity of the name was appealing and easy to roll off the tongue for men under stress, and the military loved acronyms. Trit led us along the protected space between the stalled cars and the brick buildings. There was a lull in the fighting. We could hear it ahead of us, and behind us, but for the moment, we were in the eye of the hurricane, a calm oasis in the chaos. "Try now," Trit held us up. "Find me someone in charge." I could see it on his face. He was tired of making decisions, tired of leading. I glanced at my wrist out of habit, then remembered my watch was gone, stripped from me when they shoved me in the armor. How long had it been since we hit the shore? 15 minutes? 2 hours? I didn't know. It felt like forever, if forever moved as fast as lightning cracking across a clear sky. I felt dizzy, and unmoored, a little out of body as I listened to Mo call for command, heard Trit sigh, and could taste the fear of the men around me, sour on the air. "I'm just here to take pictures," I muttered as I leaned back against the stucco under the storefront window. Something tapped against the glass by my head. I rolled around with a small shriek and sent 2 rounds into the plate glass. It showered into 100 pieces and sprayed the sidewalk with chunky bits. Most of it went into the store. A woman screamed. Trit bounced up, rifle aimed inside the dark interior. 2 hands went into the air as someone screamed. "We're friendly. We're friendly. Human." Trit shouted to the soldiers as they shifted into battle stance. He dropped down to his knees and peered over the edge of the stucco. A pair of wide dark eyes stared back at him. They were under a mass of curly black hair that framed the caramel-colored face of a child. She was hauled back into the dim interior. I could make out other shapes, other people, moving, shuffling. A man stepped forward into the light. He kneeled to face Trit. "Don't guess you're the rescue party?" Trit shook his head at the man. He was older, tall and lean, with long black hair streaked with gray pulled back in a messy ponytail that trailed between his shoulder blades. "This area is supposed to be clear of civilians," Trit shouted. "We got the memo," the man answered. A long bony finger pointed first toward the battle further up the street, and then to the sounds of gunfire and lasers further down. "But I guess they didn't." "You can't be here," Trit said. And yet, the man held open both hands, as if to show he had no choice. "Tango! Tango!" One of the men at the rear of our makeshift unit screamed and began firing. Others joined him, aiming at the smoke and shadows down the beach. Red blasts lanced out of the fog. Trit rolled over to his stomach and fired into the madness. 6 lasers dropped to 4. The rest of the soldiers poured bullets into the cloud, and in a moment there were no more alien shots. I shifted into something wet. Brooks sprawled beside me, a stream of vomit and blood trailing from his lips. His middle was gone, burned out. I yanked him over to expose his back. The radio was a smoking shell. "Son of a bitch," Trit moved next to me. "If it weren't for goddamn bad luck." He glanced into the building, glanced up and down the street. The long-haired man leaned up. "You're a fish in a barrel, son," he said. "We're in the middle of a firefight." "I'm not saying retreat," the old man said. "I'm telling you to regroup." Trit looked down at Brooks and the other survivors. Up and over, he made a decision. The long-haired man crabbed backwards and I slid over the sill of the window, followed by the other 14 survivors. Trit was the last over the edge. He propped up in the window and waited to see if any aliens followed. None did. Chapter 5. I stared into the room. A sea of scared faces stared back at me. Wide eyes watched the windows, watched the soldiers, watched me. I did a quick count and lost it at 27. Men, women and children huddled together in small clusters against the walls of the building. "Who the hell brings kids to a firefight?" I heard Trit mutter. "Who brings a firefight to where the kids are?" the gray-hair man asked. His voice was low and smooth, like it had been paved with whiskey and belonged on a radio. He radiated calm. The people who were watching us kept a closer eye on him. I suspected if he told them to push us back through the window they would. "This area was supposed to be clear," said Trit repeated, as if saying it would make it so. "We had no way to contact anyone either way. If there was a radio, it was on the other side of the sidewalk and street beyond, somewhere on the beach strapped to the back of a dead guy." The long tall man kneeled next to Trit. Up close, I could see the wrinkles around his eyes, the sun-baked texture to his skin. He looked like any minute, the word dude would come out of his mouth and fit. The man belonged on a surfboard, the epitome of sun culture. Here he was, stuck inside a building with a group of scared people. "Survivors," I corrected myself. "That your only radio?" he asked. Trit nodded. The man sighed. "Well, come on then." He scuttled back to the rear of the store. "You have a radio?" Trit shifted. "No son, I don't have a radio. I've got a bunch of scared people you just turned into targets. We're going to get them out of here." Trit glanced around at the other soldiers. "Sorry old man, we're in the middle of something here." I could hear the sounds of something metal scraping across the floor. "And I can respect that, soldier," the old man said. "But we were doing just fine till you blew out that front window and told every damn lick in LA where we were hiding." I don't know if he meant it. Everyone I could see didn't look fine. They looked terrified. I suppose I did too, so maybe I was just seeing what I wanted to see. "We can't abandon our post," Trit grunted. "Wasn't your post to begin with?" The gray-haired man dragged a shelf out of the darkness. It squealed as it scraped across the floor while he angled it in front of the open window. "We commandeered it," Trit told him. "Yeah? Well, good luck with that. There ain't much that can stop them from coming through, and those pea shooters you're popping back at them don't seem to do the trick." "We killed plenty," Trit said. "Plenty? How many is that? How many are there to begin with?" "We encountered heavy resistance when we landed on the beach." "Crashed," the man corrected. "Crashed," Trit kept going. "Our scouts didn't report back and we have been unable to contact command." The old man nodded. "No word from on high, huh? No radio? Well, I don't think it would matter much if you did. We had a little advantage hidden in here, and from all we could see, there's not too many of you boys left." He looked around at the scared group of men staring back at him. His ice-cold eyes locked on mine for a moment. Then they softened, just a hint of the skin around the eyes relaxing, and it made him look on the verge of laughter. Somehow, it helped. "I don't know how much good you can do going out there and getting yourself killed," he said. "But I could use your help getting these people someplace safe." "It's not safe inland," Trit said. "It's not safe anywhere," I added. "I figured as much," he sighed. "Then I need your help getting to another building." Trit shook his head, but there was no conviction in it. "I don't know you, man." The old man bent over and held out his hand. "I'd a wild story," he said. Trit stared at the hand a moment before taking it. Story lifted him up from the ground and clapped him on the shoulder. "Trit," the soldier introduced himself. "Damn glad to meet you." Story held his other hand out to me as he let go of Trit. "Aldine," I told him as he lifted me up. "Sure appreciate your help." He directed me toward the back of the building with a tug on the forearm and push on the elbow. It was subtle and dynamic. I'd met a politician once who had the same manner. Relaxed. Calm. 100% in control. I watched as he introduced himself to the rest of the surviving soldiers. "Son of a bitch," Trit whispered next to me. "What?" "I think that son of a bitch just conscripted us." Chapter 6. Trit motioned 2 soldiers forward, calling them by the stenciled names on their chest armor. Cooper, Muir. They slung their rifles by the strap and helped a few of the men move racks and shelves from where they blocked a back door. "Where does this go?" Trit asked Story. "Alley," he answered. "It was clear before." "Then why did you block it?" "I only wanted visitors to come through the window," Story smiled. Trit snorted. He moved next to the door and pressed an ear against it. "Hear anything?" Cooper asked. "Not with you talking," Trit snapped. He stood up after a moment and shook his head. "I can't hear anything," he said. "Doesn't mean they're not out there." "Damn licks," Story muttered. It was followed by a few others in the crowd. "You got a special way you want to do this, General?" It was Story's turn to snort. "Not really my style," he said to the soldier. "I almost imagined the dude that was meant to follow." "You're in charge," said Trit. "I'll take care of my men, but you're riding herd on the civilians." He snapped his fingers. "Cooper, Muir, you," he pointed to me. "He doesn't have a name on his uniform?" "No sir," said Trit. "This one was a last-minute addition to our fight." "How'd that go?" Story directed to me. "I think I shit my pants. Better than I would have then." "Ain't a clean pair in the bunch of us," Trit said. "It's how you know you're alive. Don't dead men shit their pants too?" Story said. "Yes sir, but they don't give a shit about it." "Aldine," I told him. He nodded. "We're going to check the perimeter and set up in case the alien bastards try to make an end run around the building," said Trit. "You get those fuckers out of here." He motioned to the crowd of people clustered around us. Story nodded. "Try not to draw the other fuckers down on us," he advised. "Go with them," Trit said to the rest of the soldiers as he leaned against the door. It didn't budge. "Stuck," he grunted and heaved. It rocked open with a loud crack and bounced off the brick wall with a gong-like sound that echoed up the alley. "Shit," he ducked and glanced. The coast was clear. "Follow me." I spilled out after him with Cooper and Muir on my heels. Trit led us to 5 feet from the beachside end of the alley and dropped to his knees against the wall. "Hold him here," he said in a low voice. "Buy them some time to get clear." He took a quick look over his shoulder as Story peeked through the open door. The older man motioned the rest through the door and ushered them to the other side of the alley. "We gonna go with them?" Cooper asked. "You wanna get back in the fight so bad?" Trit nodded toward the beach. It was clear for the moment, but they could hear the scattered sounds of gunfire and lasers blasting close by. "That's why we're here," Cooper argued. Trit watched the group of survivors from the building move to the far end of the alley where they huddled together. "Let's get them clear first." "Fuck them," said Cooper. "That's not our job." "I said it is," Trit growled. "You don't have rank," Cooper shot back. "You're just a shitbird that started saying stuff and people followed you." "You followed him," Muir pointed out. "I was trying to keep up with you." "You came out here," I said. "Who the fuck is this guy?" Cooper shouldered me to one side. I lost my balance and toppled across the stained concrete. "I'm not supposed to be here," I tried to get up. 3 licks marched across the alley opening as they fired up the street. I froze. No one moved as they kept going past. "Back," Trit whispered. He took a quick look toward the other end of the alley. A beam lanced from the edge and scorched the brick next to his head. He returned fire as 2 lick bounced into the alley opening, blasters scoring the ground and gouging the brick around us. 3 holes opened in one of the lizard alien's face. It toppled toward me, spilling ichor and gore across the rough concrete alleyway. His laser rifle rolled sideways and bounced off the wall, Muir crabbed backwards, raised his rifle. A beam from the second alien took his leg off below the knee. The soldier took a step and fell backwards, burnt nub pounding into the ground. He screamed and his finger clenched the trigger on his rifle. It sent a full burst over my head, bullets buzzing like angry wasps. Trit hit the dirt. Cooper didn't. A hole dented his cheek and rattled the back of his helmet. He dropped like a puppet with his strings cut, and fell across me. Muir screamed again, but I don't know if it was pain or rage or both. Trit hauled me by the collar and dragged me backwards away from our end of the alley. I snagged Cooper's rifle as I went. Trit yanked Muir with the other hand and dragged him too. I kept trying to get my feet underneath me, but he was hauling us too fast for me to make it happen. The third lick raced around the corner and pounded down the alley toward us. "Shoot motherfuckers!" Trit grunted. Muir stopped screaming long enough to kill it and then we were out of the alley on a clogged street with the others. Shit, Trit let me go and fell against the wall. Another soldier, Houston, bent over and examined Muir's nub where his leg used to be. "All right, General," Trit tried to catch his breath. "It's move your ass time." "This way," Story said in his calm low voice. He led the survivors into the maze of cars that clogged the street too. Trit didn't say anything, just motioned us to follow. He let me get up and fall and step beside him. Chapter 7. The street was quiet. I could hear the shuffle of shoes on pavement of the people in front of us and the boots of the rest of the soldiers behind me, but that was it. The battle seemed farther away, but that was a trick of acoustics and two-story buildings that bounced the sound away from us. "Is this a good idea?" I asked. Trit gave me a side eye. "You got a better one?" I shook my head. "No lick fuckers to fight here. Maybe a good time to take some of them damn pictures you were going on about." I shook my head again. "I don't think we're going to make it." "What was your name again?" "Aldous." "Aldine." "Well, Aldine, if you think you ain't gonna make it, then you're probably fucking right. You ain't got the right mindset and you're putting that shit out in the universe for God to hear," he said in a low voice as we hustled after the survivors. "There's so many of them." I was talking about the aliens, but Trit shot a look at the back of Story's head and nodded. "Yeah, that is some impressive shit, keeping this many normal alive in the middle of this clusterfuck." I tried to correct him. "Yeah, them fuckers too. That's why you got to get your mind right. So you can kill them. And don't die. Don't even think about it. Like you ain't got permission to do it." I glanced over my shoulder. Houston was the only one struggling as he half-carried Muir with one arm across his shoulder. It was an unnatural version of a three-legged hop. The rest of them looked scared. I didn't believe it. They were trained for this. Not exactly this, I corrected myself and tried to lick my lips. They were dry and cracked and I wondered how long it had been since I had a drink. "We're gonna get this guy where he wants to go," Trit said. "Then we'll find out where the fight is and hook back up with the unit, and find someone in charge." I nodded toward Story. "You found someone in charge?" Trit gave a small laugh. "Yeah, he's fucking right. Just ain't in my chain of command." Story paused at the next intersection and waved for Trit to come forward. He tapped me on the arm and told me to follow. "You got something?" he asked the old man. Story shook his head. "I hear something. We need eyes on it." "Well, get your bony ass up there and take a look at it," Trit said. He moved past Story anyway and weaved through the cars toward the edge of the intersection. I followed because he didn't tell me to stay put. Trit took us between two cars into the corner of the building. "Here's gonna get tricky," he told me. "I'm going to look around this edge, but I don't want to get shot in the back of the head. So you're gonna go with me and look the other way." "What about the cars?" I pointed out. He glared at them. "The way the cars crammed the intersection, we wouldn't have a clear line of sight in one direction and only a view of the sidewalk in the other. Fucking LA drivers," he moaned. "I heard they were the worst, but they can't even drive out of town when the shit is hitting the fan?" He used the wall against his back to push up to a standing position. "All right, Aldine, same plan. We go at the same time, take a gander to see what's safe and pull back. You read me?" I nodded. "First rule of Fight Club. Don't get fucking dead." I nodded again and we both leaned out to peek. My way was clear. "Clear," Trit said as we pulled back. He made a hand signal to Story. The old man shook his head and shrugged. Trit had to use the universal waving hand motion to tell him to move forward. "Fucking amateurs," he said. "I'm one." "Yeah? You want me to get you a fucking manual?" Story led the rest of the group to the intersection and paused by Trit. "All clear? I gave you the signal, didn't I?" "I don't speak Army," said Story. "That wasn't speaking," Trit corrected. "It was sign language." "I don't do that either." It got you here, didn't it? You wanted to jaw about it or move your people across before some tango nastiness shows up to say otherwise. That, I can understand, said Story. He took a quick look too and then led the rest of his group across the narrow spaces between the gridlocked cars. Trit waited until the last civilian cleared the building on the other side and motioned the soldiers to follow. I helped Houston with Muir around the cars. The rest of the group moved around and past us, and we started pulling point on rear. Not good, not good, Houston muttered at our speed. We're gonna make it, I told him. We cleared the last car and hurried to the safety of the corner of the building. I need a minute, Houston told Trit and rested Muir against the wall. He bent over with his hands on his knees and sucked wind for a minute. I thought you trained for this? I said. 80 pounds of gear, not 200 pounds of fear, Houston told me. 175, Muir corrected. And I ain't afraid of shit. Houston stood up. Then keep up, he reached for Muir's arm and hauled it over his shoulder. You're pulling rear, Muir told me. I don't know what that means. If we get attacked from the back, tell us before you get shot. Houston hauled Muir along as they hopped to keep up with the rest. Chapter 8. The next intersection was a cluster of round steel and smashed glass. The cars were mounted in a glacier of fiberglass and plastic pieces, piled and canted onto one another. It was like the drivers got scared and tried to drive over the other cars, despite no four-wheel drive or high clearance. The result was a mess. An almost solid wall of automobile that cut across the intersection and blocked the way. We're not doubling back, I heard Trit say as the rest of us caught up with the stalled group. There's no way over, Story told him. And we can't go up to beachside to make the way. One of the kids pointed to the cars and muttered something in his mom's ear. What? Story said as he caught sight of them. She pointed too. I bent down to see where she was pointing, before Story's long ponytail blocked my view. What is it? Trit asked. A tunnel, Story stood up straight. A couple of cars ramped up on the backs of others. It's going to be a tight squeeze. Trit studied the hole between the cars for a moment. Too tight for us, he sighed. Get your people through. Story looked at the street toward the beach. You can't go back up there. This is where we part ways, Trit told him. We get back into the good fight and you get your people away. There's no good fight, said Story. Not here. Not now. You're just throwing your life away. Trit shrugged. That's why they brought us here. You know where you're going to take these people. I need your help to get them there. Safe. We can't fit, Trit angled a finger at the tunnel. And every second you spend here arguing with me keeps us exposed that much longer. I don't like those odds. Never tell me the odds, Story said. I'm a gambling addict. No shit? Poker, said Story. Though the ponies would get me too. Yeah, I ain't gambling on this shit. Our armor won't let us through. We could go over, I said. Story and Trit both looked at me. I swallowed. They go under, I pushed on. We go across the cars to the other side. It's lower over there. We can go over the top. Trit looked at the uneven crumpled mess. Look at the big brain on Altine, he said. Surprised it fits in that helmet. It's a little tight. That earned a smile. Get your people under there, Trit told him. We'll meet you on the other side. Story bent to the mother of the child who spied the tunnel. Maria, can you go first? She shook her head. But her kid had no problem with it. He dropped to his knees and scooted forward across the asphalt on all fours. Maria squeaked and made a grab for him, but missed as he slipped under the mound of crumpled vehicles. It must have been mother's instinct or Maria had an athletic background because no sooner was the kid gone, she dropped and followed him in. Let's roll, said Trit. In case they find trouble on the other side. We hustled back to almost the halfway point, the noise of our armor bouncing off the buildings in a muffled echo. The cars were packed bumper to bumper but only a single auto high. The different-sized sedans, coupes, minivans and work trucks made the jagged trek across 5 lanes a balancing act worthy of a circus. Trit led the way. Our boots clomped on the hoods and trunks, fiberglass, plastic and metal shifting and groaning against our weight. He jumped down to the other sidewalk and held his rifle ready in case something came around the corner. I popped down behind him, and got shoved out of the way as one of the soldiers, while he shouldered me aside so he could cover in the other direction. Worthless, Trit shook his head. I keep trying to tell you. Yeah, you're not supposed to fucking be here. The rest of the men dropped in to join us and Trit led us to the other side of the mound of cars. The sidewalk wasn't empty on this side. Angry desperate drivers plowed up on the walkway, and crashed into each other to create another impasse. We didn't have to worry about the lick from that direction at least, and there was a way over these blockades. There was no sidewalk on the other side. Cars blocked the way there too. Guess you didn't figure on this, Trit said. I didn't see it coming, I told him. Yeah, they don't train you for this shit shooting models, do they? Did you shoot models? With the camera, I mean? Sponsors frown on shooting them with guns. You fucking with me? He led us up and down, over hood and trunk and hood. A little. I worked with models. Swimsuit? Swimsuit. Lingerie. Boudoir. What's that? Bedroom. He paused at the end of one hood where it crinkled against the trunk. You're fucking with me again. I shook my head. It was very popular at Valentine's Day. Son of a bitch. What the hell are you doing here? He kept going and I followed. You got conscripted by Story, I got conscripted by some guy dead on that beach. Every man fights sort of thing. I think that's what he screamed at me before they locked me in. Lucky son of a bitch. To be here? Nah, you got to see some shit before you died. That's living, brother. Some people don't get to see nothing. Drit, Houston called out. His voice echoed off the building and made us stuck. I can't keep up, he said and slid Muir off his shoulder. Keep your fucking voice down, Trit hissed. One of you fuckers help him. Houston tilted back to stretch his back, a grimace plastered to his face. Watley reached for Muir. A blast tore through him and sprayed the one-legged man with a bloody mist. Down, down, Houston screamed. He crashed backwards on the car as the sounds of bullets ripped the air toward aliens on the far side of the small mountain of cars. Get them clear, Trit grabbed me by the shoulder and shoved me in the direction of Story. He laid down 3 round bursts toward the group of 9-foot lizard aliens rushing from the beach. Their height gave them an advantage. They could see over the crashed mound, or close to it. It was taller than us, so we had to stand on the cars to shoot back. We were easy targets. Houston pounded after me, hobbled with Muir, who shot from every roof and paused as they hit hood and trunk. Move. Move. Houston screamed. I kept moving. We made the far side of the next row of cars to find Story rushing the survivors along the edge of the building to get them away from the firefight. I slid off the side of a hood and caught Muir as Houston let him go beside me. I yanked the wounded man's arm over my shoulder and we limped with the group as they hurried. Houston took a position to cover the rest of the soldiers as they retreated. Don't shoot, I skidded to a stop. Muir kept going and lost his balance, pulled us both down. Fuck you, Houston said. You'll give away our position, Muir groaned. Houston pussed. He's right, Muir said. Trit's got them focused on that corner. You shoot, you give us away. He jammed his thumb toward the retreating backs of the civilians. And them. Fuck, Houston muttered. He kept his rifle aimed in the direction of the attacking aliens, but didn't fire. Get us moving, Muir told me. I helped him up and we hobbled along the sidewalk. The sound of blasters was steady and horrific. The sound of return fire was light. Too light. I couldn't count how many people were shooting based on what I heard, but it didn't sound like enough. Trit and 6 others pounded across the rest of the cars and dropped on the sidewalk. He clapped Houston on the shoulder and they peeled off, rifles held ready as they scrambled backwards, covering us as we ran. Or tried to run. I wasn't as good at the 3-legged race as Houston. Muir was taller and leaner than me, and when he bent over, it put too much weight on one side. It made my walk lopsided, which threw off his gait even further. He grunted and growled, but didn't complain. I guess a screwed-up gait beat the alternative. Half. I heard Houston yell. We got out, Trit said. This is who made it. Shit. We bunched up with the civilians at the next intersection. I thought Story was going to call us up to check again, and wondered if I'd get left with Muir to watch our backs. But the gray-haired man did the look himself. The coast was clear and we hauled ass across the tops of cars and to the other side. Chapter 9. Hauled ass was relative. There were kids and women and older adults in the civilian population, and I wasn't a speedster with helping Muir. We made it and put another set of cars between us and any aliens that might come up behind us. We need to cross to the other side, said Trit. We need to get off the street, said Story. Pick another building, Trit indicated the ones around us. Unless you have a different Shangri-La in mind. I know where we need to go, said Story, a wrinkle between his bushy eyebrows as they knit in concentration. Can you get there? We can, said Story. We better get there quick or there won't be any of us left, Trit grumbled as he glanced over the 9 of us left. Story moved his eyes across the soldiers lined up across from him. He nodded to each, his lips smirked in a half-smile. There's no way to say thank you that's going to make sense, he said. But I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Trit took a deep breath. Let's just get you where you're supposed to be, said Trit. You can thank any of us left to say it too. Think you can get a couple of your men to run point for us, keep an eye out for trouble? Point? Scoffed Trit. Looks who's talking military now. Swear, you give a general a rope, he thinks he's a cowboy. I got a lot of scared people who'd feel a hell of a lot better with guns on both ends. Trit motioned Houston closer. Hell, Story continued. I ain't afraid of saying I'm the most scared. Cowboy here might give you a run for your money, General. Cowboy, huh? Story gave me a look. No idea, I told him. I wasn't even from Texas. How far we taking this, General? 6 more blocks. Story turned his head to glare at the cars that stretched until the road curved inland and away from sight. Big building on the left. Grocery store. We won't miss it. If the lick have any say, we won't get the chance to miss it. Then let's keep those suckers quiet, Story said. Trit tapped me on the arm and hauled me past all the civilians so we could take point. You see something ain't human, you fucking shoot it, he gave simple instructions. Then we were off again. Chapter 10. No one was surprised when the shooting started again. We were in a war zone. I'd seen it before, taking pictures in the Middle East, a place so consumed with everyday war it was almost second nature when it broke out around them. The civilians between us and the rear guard gave off a few noises of surprise and fear, then ducked against the wall, huddled low to avoid blaster fire. The lick trio tore up the wall and asphalt around the soldiers. I don't think they were intentionally avoiding the civilians. They just seemed to target the men with weapons. Eyes front, Trit ordered and I braced against the brick and watched for an attack in the opposite direction. Crimson bolts chewed into the wall behind us. Houston dropped Muir and zeroed in on the center lick, while 2 soldiers named George and Thomas took out the duo on either side of it. They work in threes, Trit said, almost to himself. You noticed that? I shook my head. He looked down the line, got a thumbs up from Story and from Houston as an all clear. Fucker learns hand signals pretty quick, he said. That means up your ass in Italian, I told him as we took off again. You think that fucker looks Italian? I ain't ever met an Italian surfer before in my life. You meet many surfers? He thought about it for a moment. Nah, I can't say that I have. I knew a fella in basic who wanted to surf. Fucker got himself drowned in the Gulf. Florida? Persian. The next intersection wasn't as backed up as the others. It was still a parking lot of jammed and stalled bumper-to-bumper vehicles, but they were all sedans, as if a big group of salesmen decided to abscond to higher ground at the same time. Scoot your ass over there and see what we see, Trit told me to go to the other side of the traffic jam. I took a deep breath and scrambled over the hoods of 6 cars. The other side was safe, or as safe as it could be. Safe was relative. There were no alien invaders blocking the sidewalk, nor triplet patrols waiting to pick us off as we walked along the sidewalk. I waved to Trit. He shook his head and tried not to look too disappointed as he clambered across after me. Remind me to teach you hand signals, he said as he slid over the side of a car that tilted under his weight. The tire blew out with a loud pop that thundered against the buildings. Shit, he said. You think they heard? I whispered. A bolt seared from the far side of the group and slammed into Houston. He dropped Muir. The one-legged man screamed as the other soldiers scrambled to fire back. The civilians cowered against the wall. A red bolt seared into the group and split Maria in 2. Her son shrieked in terror. Trit leapt back on top of the canted car and took aim. He took out 2 of the licks before the third realized where the shots were coming from and began to fire back. 2 bolts zinged past Trit before the lick's face was gone. Story stood up beside Muir and handed the soldier his weapon back. He helped him up, threw an arm across his shoulder and hobbled him toward where we were standing. Trit kept guard on the top of the car. George scooped up the crying kid as he walked past and cradled him in one arm, rifle held ready in the other. I kept my head moving, trying to watch everywhere all at once. The civilians crawled and limped across the packed cars, pushing me to one side as they gathered together. Nice shooting, General, Trit said as the old man hobbled across with Muir. Not nice enough, he said in disgust. Licks. Fucking licks, Trit agreed. One of the men stepped up and helped Muir down. Story dropped beside him. Trit waited until the last soldier, George, was across before he stepped down. He did a quick head count and curled his lip. We're losing too fast, he shouldered his way to the front. We need to get there, General. Story moved to George and took the crying boy from him. He patted him on the head and nodded. We moved out again, accompanied by the soft sobs. Chapter 11. Johnson. Done. Bradshaw, Trit muttered as I walked next to him. I watched him out of the corner of my eye to see if he was about to lose it. What are you doing? I whispered. Not that I would blame him for losing anything. It was a crazy messed up situation, and I couldn't see a way out of it. I couldn't see a way to stay in it either, not surviving anyway. Counting, he said and jerked his head to behind us. I looked over my shoulder and spied the names on the chests of the men left. Stevens. Chun. Lee, I added. He nodded. You. Me. George. Muir. Muir, he agreed with a half smile. Fading fast. We need to get out of here, get an edge, I told him. You got any ideas? I aimed my chin at the rooftops. I was in a box canyon like this in Syria once, I said. A couple of Bradleys got pinned down when Mujahideen took the high ground. We didn't get out easy. Trit studied the rooftops. Yeah, whatever these damn Lakar, alien fucks, they aren't strong on tactics. Yet. Shit, don't say that. They get better at tactics and we are royally fucked. More screwed than we are? Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say we're redlining 11 on the screwed scale. He tilted his head to one side. Still, if we could get some high ground and provide cover, we might help. Whoever goes up, stays up, I pointed out. Why? No way to go from roof to roof once you hit the intersection. Fuck. He sniffed. You ever played leapfrog? Story said behind us. Trit nodded again. Won't be pretty, he said. Won't be easy either, Story agreed. What's leapfrog? Watch, said Trit. Johnson. Done. He waved the two soldiers up to us. Get into that building and get to the roof. Get me eyes up on the next block. Don't fucking leave us up there, Dunn stuttered. I ain't going to leave your ass up there, Trit shot back. Not if I can help it. You give me cover fire if we need it, heads up if we need it, and I'm sending some more boys up the next block over while I wait on the corner for you. Dunn still didn't look convinced. He'll be hanging out like a Philly street walker, I said. I'm from Philly, Dunn grumbled. No shit? Trit sniffed. You know that? I shook my head. Heard a guy say it once overseas. Small fucking world, said Trit. He turned back to Dunn and stared into his scared dark eyes. All right, Dunn? I'm waiting on you like a hooker waits on a John. Dunn took a deep breath and held it. Sack up, numbnuts, Johnson jammed his shoulder into Dunn's. You keep me from walking into trouble, and keep trouble off me if it comes calling. Dunn nodded. He took the lead and tried to open the door to the 3-story commercial building. The glass shivered in the frame but it didn't budge. Locked, he turned back. Trit kicked the glass out of the frame and scattered shattered glass into the dark narrow hallway beyond. I had the key, he said. Move. The two soldiers scrambled inside the building as Trit hustled the civilians along the city block. He waited at the next intersection and stared up at the rooftop, searching. After several moments, two heads popped over the edge. Dunn made a signal with his hand. Clear, Trit said. Chun, Lee, Stevens. Get over there and repeat that action. I want you on the roof and overwatch me, you got it? They nodded and clambered across the cars. Trit waited until they were on the other side. They had to break into the building too. I hoped the noise wouldn't attract the aliens on us, but we were lucky for the moment. As soon as the trio of soldiers disappeared inside the building, Trit stood back and let Story get his people across the intersection. I snapped my head back and forth, on edge as the 27 survivors made their way through the intersection. They were quiet, I gave them that much. But some weren't quick. Fear made them keep moving, or maybe it was the soft encouragement from Story that kept them going. They moved, but it felt like it was taking too long. The last man finally made it across. I gave him some slack because he was helping Muir. The one-legged soldier propped up against the wall and held his rifle ready, face rigid in pain. Go, said Trit. He waved up to Dunn and Johnson before he pounced across the hoods of the stalled cars and settled on the corner of the sidewalk, weapon aimed at the beach. The two soldiers must have been hustling because they reached the street in double time to cross the traffic jam. You waited, Dunn said. Said I would, didn't I? Trit slapped him on the back. We got eyes up on this one, so hit point and stay woke. The two nodded and hustled toward the front of the civilians. Hurts? He said to Muir. Like hell. I tell you we're gonna find a medic when this is all done, but I don't like making promises I can't keep. Muir shivered and almost lost his balance. He caught himself against the wall and held tight. I can deal with it, he said through clenched teeth. The man who helped him across the car slipped back and under his arm. I was an EMT, he said to Trit. A few years ago. Fuck yeah, Trit said. You don't forget that shit, do you? I got fired, the man confessed. Hell man, you get fired for forgetting? Pills, the man helped Muir up the street. Then we're still alright. Trit. Stevens or Ali leaned over the edge of the parapet and shouted. I could see everyone on the street flinch at the sound. Trit took a deep breath to scream at him when the soldier pointed. I looked too, but the building across the street blocked the view. We heard it though. Like a freight train or a whooshing roar that bounced off the walls of the building behind us. A crimson bolt cracked through the sky like errant lightning and obliterated the top of the building we were under. Chunks of debris, concrete and dust cascaded onto the civilians. I felt a hunk of something bounce off my helmet and the searing pain of burning concrete slid across my neck. Run! Trit screamed. I don't think anyone heard him over the shouts and wails of the crowd. An alien hoverjet rounded the intersection behind us, but they were focused on the rooftop. Someone was still alive, maybe more than one someone. We could hear the rattle of automatic weapons fire and see the pings of sparks off the hoverjet. One of the licks pitched over the edge of the open top and smashed down into the gridlocked traffic with a sick crunch. Move! Move! Trit roared again and tried to corral everyone forward. They surged behind Story as the aliens sent blast after blast into the rooftop. A soldier flipped over the edge and cracked into the sidewalk behind us with a wet thud. Trit spun around and dropped to one knee. He took careful aim at the hovering alien craft and sent a 3-round burst into the driver. The lick dropped to the deck and the hovercraft cantered into the building. The final third of the patrol leaned over the edge and sent a return blast back at Trit. I tackled him and we spilled into the gutter as laser fire turned the concrete where he had been into molten ripples. Son of a bitch, he shoved me off of him and aimed from his back. He shot again and the lick's head drooped over the side of the hoverjet. You hit? He crawled out of the gutter and dragged me with him. I don't think so. Keep going. He waved everyone forward. That was a slick move you did right there. Saved my ass. Just payback, I told him. Yeah, we gonna keep score like that. He dragged me to catch up with the crowd. You owe me a hell of a lot. Chapter 12. We reached the huddled crowd at the next intersection, checked for lick patrols and ran up and over the gridlock. We have to get off this street, Trit called to Story. Listen, the old man put a hand to his ear. I cocked my head to one side and listened for what he heard. Nothing. Shit, Trit grumbled. We got to go fast. What is it? I said. I don't hear anything. No battle, he said. We missed the fight? He shook his head as he shouldered through the civilians toward Story. The fight is coming to us, Trit told him. If the beach assault is over, the damn licks are going to do a mop-up operation. We could split up, Muir suggested. Story put the kibosh on that idea. We stick together, he said. Move a street or so up and we're still in an almost direct line for where we want to go. What's in this fucking store? Trit shook his head. Gold? Story answered with a shake of his own. Gold won't do us much good in this new world order, will it? It's got to be worth something. No, Story shook his head again. This is about survival. Can we debate it later? I asked. I hoped it didn't come out as a whine. Trit shot a look in my direction but kept his mouth shut. Point, he said, and I joined him as we jogged up the block. The others ran behind us, Johnson and Dunn at the rear. I could see the fear on their faces when I looked back. They had the crowd packed that close. I wondered if I looked as scared as they did and decided I did. They were trained for this shit. I wasn't. There, Trit said as we reached the next intersection. I could see a break in the buildings 2 blocks ahead of us and opposite of our side of the street. Cars still blocked it, bumper to bumper, like a metal fence with jagged uneven tops. Smoke blew in off the beach and carried with it the stench of waste, gunpowder and the sweet sick stench of burning meat. I hated that my stomach rumbled as I wondered if it was lick or human. The thought made me nauseous and hungry at the same time. Preaching to the choir, brother, Trit said. We'll get some MREs ASAP, but I ain't making any promises when ASAP is. I don't have a pack, I reminded him. Shit, he agreed and smiled. Guess you're gonna just suck it up, Buttercup. He nodded to a break in the cars. It wasn't much of a break. We had seen a car canted up over the edge of another to make a tunnel, and a few smashed together to create a metal mountain. It only made sense that a panicked driver plowed under the back end of a car and created almost a narrow pass, just an easy step up and over. We would have to move fast though. The open building further up was making me nervous. I don't like it, Story said as he examined where Trit proposed we cross. It's gonna be smooth and easy, the soldier assured him. Has been so far, Story smirked. Done, Johnson, Trit called the 2 rear guard up. Get over there and get us a perimeter. He meant watch in both directions on the other side. The 2 men nodded and clomped over the blockade. I half expected an attack and was a little surprised when nothing came. Your turn, General, Trit said. He settled on his knee to watch one direction, rifle ready. I copied him, pointed up the street toward the beach. Bradshaw took a knee next to me. I could hear his breathing, rough and labored. "You alright?" I asked as Story led his group across. "Fine," Bradshaw said. I glanced over at him. He looked fine. Armor still shiny in some spots. His helmet was dusty and dented. "You get hit?" "Building," he told me and coughed. "The guy with Muir is an EMT, I reassured him. "Soon as we get where we're going, I'll get him to check you out." "Appreciate it," he said. Tritt glanced over his shoulder. "Go," he told me. I tapped Bradshaw on the shoulder and peeled off across the low pass of cars. "Next," I heard Tritt say. I dropped on the far side and held back. Bradshaw stepped carefully across. I held out a hand to help him down. "Thanks," he said and swung his rifle around as he took a position next to Dunn. Tritt dropped beside me. 2 blocks, he said. I followed him through the crowd and we started toward the open space a few blocks away. "Tritt," Dunn hissed. I looked back. Bradshaw was down. Tritt made his way back to the fallen man. I stayed close on his heels. "You see the shot?" Tritt asked on high alert, weapon roving the empty sky. "He just fell." Tritt bent down and slipped his hand out of the glove. He put 2 fingers to his neck. "Fuck," he said. He fumbled the snap to his thick helmet and peeled it away from the dead man's head. There was an open wound in his scalp that showed bone, blood and gray matter. I turned away before I got sick. "Clear his weapons," Tritt told Dunn. The soldier glanced at the crowd of civilians and back at the dead man in front of him. "Lot of us dying," he said in a low voice. "That's our job, ain't it?" Tritt said. "Fighting," Dunn sulked. "You better button it up and tuck in that bottom lip," Tritt warned him. "We are fighting. You rather be dead on the beach? It's that way. It just isn't fair. Third rock from the sun getting invaded by alien like it's some science fiction movie shit ain't fair," said Tritt. "I mean, the universe is a big fucking place. How did they find us? You tell me that shit and we'll talk about fair." "I dunno," Dunn shrugged. "We're in a fight to keep these folks safe, and so far, it's working," Tritt said. "Let's get this job done, and Cowboy here says he wants to get some chow." Dunn shrugged again. "I'm pretty hungry too." "Fuck yeah," said Tritt. "Now getting chow might be a fight too. They didn't fucking kid me out with a bag of dicks or nothing. We're gonna have to hunt up some beans and bullets when this shit is done." "I'm with you," said Dunn. He took a deep breath, as if his crisis of faith had passed. I suspected it was harder for him, since he was a soldier. "Was he in your unit?" "I didn't know him," said Dunn. "Hell, I don't know any of you. All our units got mixed up and blended just trying to stay alive." I nodded, but didn't know what to tell him. My normal refrain seemed like it would fall on deaf ears, or if not deaf, then ears that did not care to hear about it. "We green?" Tritt asked. "Super green," Dunn agreed. I followed our impromptu leader back to the front of the group. "Sorry about your man," Story said as we passed. "Get us there before it happens again," Tritt told him. We made the next intersection and crossed without incident. Chapter 13. "A Rodney's?" Tritt scoffed. "That's your big idea?" "It is a big idea," Story defended. We were huddled between cars and a building at the last intersection before the big box building. It was the back anchor of a 3-sided strip mall with a giant parking lot in the front. "Too many windows," Tritt said. "Too much open space to get there." "Food," Story told him. "And space." He used his finger to point out the other places. "Hardware store. Tools. Consignment shop. We can settle in here for the long haul." "You're planning to rehab this neighborhood?" Tritt nodded toward the beach a few blocks away from us. "They're not going to stay," Story told him. "They set up emplacements for your assault, but now that that's over, they're going to regroup at their base." "You know where that is? Why didn't we hit it?" "It's north of here," Story said. "I don't know where. Too busy trying to get the hell out of Dodge to find out?" "The military has better eyes than mine to figure it out," Story told him. "And I'm not getting out of Dodge until we get these people out. These people and a hell of a lot more who got trapped, just like we did." Tritt studied him for a few moments. "What?" the old man asked. "Who died and elected you Moses to lead people out of this shit?" "Moses? General? Hell son, sometimes a man has got to stand up and be counted. That's all this is." Tritt nodded, but I couldn't tell if he agreed with the man or admired him. "How?" I asked. Story shrugged. "I don't know how. I'm sort of making this up as I go along. But if coyotes can smuggle people across the border, we sure as hell can do something to get people out of here." "That your plan all along?" Tritt indicated the group of survivors. "Not all of it," he said. But let's just say you boys inspired me. Don't go handing out medals yet, said Trit. That parking lot is a big fucking mess of open space. We'll go around back, said Story. There's always a back door. He stood up to start and Dunn yanked him back down. Hold, he hissed. I followed the direction where his wide dark eyes were staring and tried to duck lower behind the cars. There were 3 or 4 hover jets a few blocks away, coming in our direction. A fucking parade, Trit growled. He glared at the civilians, the buildings and the 4 soldiers left plus me. No way to get cover in time, he told Story. We're fucked. We could hear them now as they drew closer. I could feel the tension in the crowd behind me, like a living thing. They were on the verge of bolting, scattering, and when they did, the licks would swoop in and blast them. Blast us if we stayed, kill us if we ran. Trit had it right. Come on, Dunn yanked Johnson by the arm and leapt on top of the car. He pounded across the hoods and trucks, up over ceilings and raced for the beachside intersection on the far side of the block. Johnson ran with him, raised his rifle and sent a single shot in their direction. He was moving while shooting at a moving target and there was no way he hit the lick. But it must have zoomed close because the hovercraft lifted to one side and shuddered. It bought enough time for the 2 soldiers to make the intersection and hit the sidewalk. They disappeared around the corner. The hovercraft recovered, tilted forward and raced after them, followed on the heels by the other 2. I glanced at Muir and at Trit. We were the only 3 remaining of the soldier contingent, and Story was only down 1 person. Think they'll make it? I asked. It was a dumb question, and I felt stupid for asking it. Laser blasts echoed off the buildings in the direction they ran, overpowering the tinny little rat-tat-tat of the automatic weapons. Trit tilted his head to one side and Story followed as they led the rest of the group toward the back of the building. I stayed for a moment. Stayed to watch where the 2 men ran away, where the aliens followed them. Stayed to wonder about their sacrifice, and to wonder for just a moment, why they did it. There was no easy answer. None I liked anyway. I gave up and trudged after the survivors as they huddled at the middle of the building on our side and stared into the dark alley 4 cars away. Chapter 14. Trit waited until I caught up. You're going up and over, cowboy, he told me. I'd send Muir to do it. I shuddered. I could stay here, I offered. You could, he said. But if trouble hops out over there, can you handle this side of the mess? I didn't answer. Truth was, I couldn't remember handling much of any of the mess we found ourselves in for the past few hours. I pulled the trigger, just like I was told, and pointed my gun in the direction I was told. That much I could do, if I had a couple of trained soldiers at my back or by my side. Going over alone scared me. Story put his hand on my shoulder. I'll go with you. There were grumbles of protest from the crowd, tiny mutterings that seemed ungrateful, and made the thanks that almost popped to my lips fall flat. Trit handed him his rifle. I'll use Muir's, he said. There's nothing over there, I told him. Nothing we can see, Trit agreed. Alley's dark and I've got blind spots on the parking lot another direction of the sidewalk. You cover 'em for me. I sighed and tried to repress another shudder. It didn't work. Me too, Story whispered as he stepped past me and used the cracked plastic bumper like a step to get on the trunk of the car in front of us. I followed. There was a gap between the last and second to last car. Story hopped it with no problem. My armor was heavy. I wasn't used to the weight, wasn't familiar with moving in it and missed the edge. One leg slammed down and momentum pitched me forward. I bounced off Story and sent him sailing over the side of the car to crash on the sidewalk. I tried to turn my fall into a roll, failed in spectacular fashion and smashed down next to him. Ow, he said. Ow, I agreed. I made it to my feet first and offered him a hand up. He took it, a smile creasing his lips, crinkling the skin around his eyes. That last step is a doozy. I yanked him behind me and blocked him with my body as a figure darted from the alley. It fired 3 shots into my back. It felt like getting hit with a sledgehammer and sent us both against the car. I heard Story oomph and couldn't breathe as I fell. The figure dashed forward, small handgun raised at Story's head. I shifted and lifted the rifle in my hand, squeezed the trigger and watched the body fall. It was a man, not an alien. A normal man with a normal gun ready to shoot another survivor. I tried to take a breath and couldn't. It hurt too much. I couldn't feel my legs, all I could feel was a throbbing pain in my back. 3 of them, if I thought about it. The world took on a different color as my oxygen-starved brain tried to make sense of what happened. Someone rolled me over. I could feel hands on my shoulders, on my neck and nothing else. Trit rolled me back. He's not breathing, Story said. Trit drew back a hand and slapped me across the face. I gasped. Fucking wind knocked out of him. Trit leaned my back against the car. Be still. Story settled next to me, knees drawn up to his chest as he massaged it with one hand. I watched Trit stand up and slip into the alley. The rest of the survivors trekked across the final 4 cars as I caught my breath. Muir sat next to me while the rest of the crowd huddled and waited. He put a hand on my armor and leaned me forward. "Lucky," he said. "Don't feel lucky. Armor took the brunt of it," Muir assured me. "You're gonna have a hell of a bruise. Like being hit with a baseball bat." "Sledgehammer," I said. "You're not alone," Story told him. He peeled open the collar of his shirt and showed a red line turning yellow and blue on his chest. "Saving my life hurt like hell," he grinned. "For both of us. Hell of a thing." Trit came of the alley. "Rest of the way is clear. Someone's been at the door, but it's still locked." Story reached inside his shirt and pulled out a key on a string. "I'll take care of that." Muir held a hand out for Trit to help him up. "Let's get undercover and reassess," he suggested. "Fucking outstanding idea." He passed Muir off to the XEMT and helped Story up. It took both of them to help me up and I felt as weak and helpless as an invalid learning to walk. They didn't say anything, just put a shoulder under each arm and walked me into the alley. "Good shot," said Trit. "Lucky," I tried to shrug. "It hurt." "I was lucky," said Story. "You saved my life." "Guess I was where I was supposed to be," I said. We reached the door and the man we called the general unlocked it and led us into safety. The end.